This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host Gilad Halpern. Today's episode is a special one, as we're teaming up with Israel in Depth, the podcast of the Yunus and Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA. The director of the center, Professor Dov Waxman, is joining me as co-host for the first in a series of monthly podcasts. Dov is a professor of political science and the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Chair in Israel Studies at UCLA, is now with us on the line. Hello, Dov.
Hello, Gilad.
Israel is heading for a general election, the fifth in 2.5 years. We are not here to offer comment and analysis. For that, you have plenty of other media platforms. But we are going to try to go to the bottom of probably the most acute political crisis in the country's history. What are the root causes? Whether there's any evidence to suggest that we might be pulling out of it? Is it just another déjà vu? Are we going to see the exact same thing playing over again? Or are there any trends suggesting to the contrary?
To answer those questions for us, our guest today is Professor Gideon Rahat, the Gerstein Family Chair in Political Science and the Chair of the Political Science Department at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is also a Senior Fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. Professor Rahat has authored and edited numerous books, including The Elections in Israel 2019 to 2021, which he co-edited with Professor Michal Shamir, was published earlier this year in English by Routledge.
Professor Gideon Rahat, hello and welcome back to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello. I'm happy to be back. Yeah.
So, your first appearance here in April 2019 seems like generations ago. It was just before the first election in this seemingly endless round. You were here in the studio talking about the personalization of politics, how candidates have become the focus at the expense of parties and ideologies. The time that has passed since then seems to have vindicated your claim entirely. The political discourse is hinged, it seems, on whether Netanyahu stays or goes. Is the personalization of politics in Israel due to Netanyahu, or are there any deeper factors at play? Will this trend continue even after Netanyahu finally departs, if he finally departs from the Israeli political scene?
There are many reasons for the personalization of Israeli politics. It's not just Netanyahu, but I think that Netanyahu is really riding the wave and also making it even more extreme. So it's both. I mean, the personalization of Israeli politics didn't start with Netanyahu. According to our studies in the Hebrew University, together with Professor Tamir Sheffer, for example, we actually traced the first signs for political personalization already at the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s. We saw trends of personalizations which were pronounced by the media becoming more and more focused on the party leaders. We traced different developments within political parties that led to personalization. First, the primaries, and these days, of course, the selection by the leader, the selection of the whole list. And then we also had the direct election for the prime minister. We cancelled it, but we stayed with this idea of personalization, of that people are thinking sometimes that they elect the prime minister, while they do not. They elect the parliament like they do in any parliamentary democracy. So there are many reasons. Now, Netanyahu, I think, took it to the extremes. Now, the elections became a referendum for and against Netanyahu. And I think that the best proof for this is that if you count the right-wing seats in the Israeli Knesset, you end up with about 72. And then you ask yourself, how come you don't have a stable right-wing government? And the reason is that Netanyahu has probably the plurality, the support of many people, 40%, 45%, but he never gets close to the 50%, according to opinion polls, it's very unclear whether he will get the 61 seats unless some other things will happen, like parties would not pass the threshold, but he's still not there. And I think this is the reason for this stalemate. Now, the second question would be, if I may ask it myself, okay, let's imagine that Netanyahu is leaving politics or is out of politics, whether things will change. I don't, unfortunately, this would not be a solution. Once you pass the Rubicon, once you see by your own eyes this personalization, all of the things that have to do with it. I mean, a parliament that is elected and ousts itself. I don't know a lot of people that got the job of their, that they dreamt about, and then they fire themselves. And that's what our Knesset members are doing again and again. This is, and then we had the government led by a leader of a party with 6 or 7 seats. Another precedence that I think would be with us. Another thing, alternate government, this idea of 2 prime ministers. So we have so many things injected into our system. Once you inject it, I don't think we'll get rid of them.
But as you're saying, it is irrational, right? They are over and over again voting against their own interests. Why would they not, whether it weren't for Netanyahu's magical powers, whatever they are, why would they not, for right-wing politicians, form a stable 72-seat coalition that represents 2/3 of the Israeli population?
I must tell you something as a political scientist. From day one, I know that rationality is something that you assume, but it is never there. I was shocked again and again to see that politicians are irrational. Now, they do not know that they are irrational. They think that they are rational. But, as someone who stands on the sideline and do analysis, many times I find out that they work against their interest. I even have a very funny article in which I show, and this doesn't make sense, that politicians who voted for the direct election for the prime minister most of the politicians that voted for direct election for prime minister voted against their interest, while those who rejected it voted it was actually good for them. And I could prove it because I showed that when they canceled it, they truly understood their interests, so they changed their minds. But so to think that politicians are rational is a very good tool for an analysis, but it doesn't mean that they are really rational.
So on the subject of irrationality, it's often said that, doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. And that seems to be the case with Israeli politics. There are repeated elections, one after another. Each time there's hope that, things will be different this time, but yet the outcome seems similar to the previous elections. And this one certainly seems to be the case. So, looking over the last 4 elections and now approaching this 5th election, is there anything different? Has anything changed? Is there just this endless repetition, this cycle of elections? There is this sense, both I think inside Israel and certainly from afar, that we've seen this play before. Do we have any reason to expect anything different this time?
Well, there is one single rational actor here. His name is Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants to reshuffle the cards until he gets the result that he wants, 61 seats. Now, he reshuffled and reshuffled and reshuffled, and he do it again and again. And his interests have to do with his own personal problems with his trial, etc., etc. And his power also has to do, it's not magical power. Netanyahu took care not to let anyone, anything grow near him. Anyone that, you could think that might be a challenge for Netanyahu found himself out. Gideon Sa'ar, Moshe Kachlon, Bogi Ya'alon. Look at Ayelet Shaked. Look at Bennett. So Netanyahu knows how to. He holds the right wing, and within the right wing, he's the leader. I think maybe it's something like Trump in the United States. Many people didn't like Trump at the beginning, but they surrendered.
Right, absolutely. No, there's certainly a number of comparisons there. But Netanyahu's behavior has been consistent, and his interest in having these repeat elections is clear. But what about Israeli voters? I mean, what's striking in the series of elections is, first of all, people continue to turn out to vote, and they continue to vote more or less the same way time and again. Is that true, or are we missing something? Are there, whether it in terms of turnout or in terms of voting behavior, has anything shifted from one election to the next?
There were small changes, but mainly people voted for the same camp. Maybe they changed the party, and this we have to understand personalization of politics doesn't mean that politics is only about the person and gossip and stuff like this. This is not the case. Voting for Netanyahu and against Netanyahu have to do with policy, have to do with ideology, have to do with your worldview about what democracy is all about. Netanyahu in the last few years has become the champion of populist and majoritarian democracy. He's talking in the name of the people. Now, we all know there are no people out there, but there is a majority from one time to another. And those who are against Netanyahu tend to be more in support of liberal democracy, strong courts, strong media, etc., and not of a majoritarian democracy. So voting for and against Netanyahu is not just about one person, it's about a whole package of values, of worldviews, and in Israel a lot have to do, of course, with your own identity. And identity have to do with religion, how strongly religious or secular you are, Ashkenazi or Mizrahi, Arabic or Muslim or Jew, etc., etc.
Do you think that this is a testament to perhaps the deficiencies of Israeli democracy, the fact that people don't elect based on policy and worldview, but by their own identity? And does that account for the fact that it seems like the concept of an Israeli swing voter does not exist?
Well, there are a few swing voters there, but you can meet them in a park. Yeah, but
they all fit in a phone booth. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean there are a few thousands, but I don't think it's Israel is different from other countries. If you look at elections in many countries, people change parties, but most of them stay most of their life in the same neighborhood, in the same block. Some people are changing, but most of the people view as their parents voted. Now, you have to understand, some people are looking, from the elite. They look at the people, how these people vote for, I don't know, for Trump or Netanyahu. Come on, and you people, you were, you were born progressive, and you will be progressive, and your kids will be progressive. Meaning, the identity is something that we all carry, but also university professors like me or like Dov. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I want to return to your previous comment because I think it's very important in terms of understanding what has changed. I mean, for a long time, the conventional wisdom about Israeli politics was that it was divided. The central cleavage was over the future of the occupied territories and the territorial issue. If that's no longer the case, is it true then that the nature of Israeli democracy, this kind of question of majoritarianism versus liberalism, perhaps, has replaced the territorial issue as the kind of central cleavage? Netanyahu, in other words, symbolizes this deeper divide about the nature of Israel today. Is that correct?
It is correct, even though you might claim that at least the future of the territories is still linked with Netanyahu, and of course there are anti-Netanyahu forces that also support the idea of Greater Israel. So it's become maybe a secondary issue. Now we have to understand it's a secondary issue because of this ugly thing that called reality. First, we had the second uprising in 2001, 2002 that many Israelis that before supported...
Palestinian uprising.
Yeah, the second Palestinian uprising of 2002. So many Israelis that supported the idea of a two-state solution out of pragmatic motivation or they said, okay, it's not a possible solution. Then came the disengagement from Gaza, which was an idea, we will do whatever is good for the state of Israel. And that's also some people think didn't work, even though that we can argue whether if Israel was still in Gaza, whether it would serve its interests. But nevertheless, it doesn't seem to work so well. So, and then the Palestinians, okay, let's imagine that Meretz gets 61 seats or Hadash. Can they really make peace with the Palestinians when the Palestinians are divided between Hamas in Gaza and the PLO in the West Bank? So, this ugly reality means that, okay, let's say that you support the two-state solution. So what?
It's become irrelevant, essentially, in the minds of Israeli voters.
It's irrelevant for the short run for anyone. So you put it aside. It's still there, but there are other issues out there, and I think that the future of Israeli democracy, what is democracy all about, values, more secularism, more religious state, etc., etc.
So there's been a lot of concern both in Israel and abroad about the future of Israeli democracy. And, this notion that particularly under Netanyahu, there has been this erosion of the quality of Israeli democracy, a process that, as a political scientist, we call democratic backsliding. Do you think that concern is well-founded? Is this worry about the future of Israeli democracy well-founded? Is democracy really on the ballot, so to speak, or is it more the kind of, overheated and exaggerated concerns by maybe opponents of Netanyahu or people that don't like him?
Well, the good news is that still, I cannot say for how long, the only legitimate way in Israel to replace a government is through elections. And this is something that is really important. In some countries, when elections didn't work, other things worked. So these are the good news. The bad news is that, of course, if you think that democracy is more than the rule of the majority, the rule of the people, you should be concerned because some people want to make the courts, to make them weaker. I think that the Israeli media has become much, much weaker than before. It is it's pressured by economic and political interest, and this is clear from Netanyahu trial and from other things that we see. And other parts of society are also seem to be less democratic than before. Israeli democracy, actually, according to indices that are used all over the world, has become stronger in the 80s, 90s with the Likud government. But then, I think that in the last decade, like many other countries, we had backsliding. We backslided, according to all of the indices, as much as I remember. According to some of them more, according to some of them less. And this is something that happens all over the world. And this is why it's worrying, because you see that there is some kind of cooperation between leaders from different countries that are supporting this idea of populist democracy. The basic idea of populist democracy is that there are the people and there are the corrupted elites, what we call in Israel the old elites. And this populism has become stronger and stronger, not only in Israel, it's strong in the United States. I think Trump represents it. Brazil with Bolsonaro, even though I think that in Brazil they are both populists, but somewhat different. But you see that populism is all over. In maybe in the last few years we see some decline, but it didn't say the last word. Populism, not in Israel, not in the world.
You mentioned Trump and Bolsonaro. Both, certainly Trump, but even Bolsonaro have before their elections, called into question the integrity of the system, challenged the system, and of course, Trump's great lie about the 2020 election being stolen. We don't seem to, at least it doesn't appear that there is the same trend in Israel to call into question the integrity of the elections. Are you worried about that? Do you think, that Netanyahu or others could basically question the validity of this election, could challenge the election results and simply refuse to accept them, as Trump most famously did, and perhaps as Bolsonaro may well do?
And even a bigger question is, what kind of support that notion will have within Israel. It invites a discussion about faith in the system as a whole.
Well, in the last elections, there was already an attempt to delegitimize the elections, and it didn't really work. There was an attempt. Whether it will work in the next elections, I cannot predict. I think that people are still have some faith in the elections, but nevertheless, if it will be organized in a certain way, it might be a problem. And delegitimizing elections is a huge problem for democracy. Because democracy is about a lot of things, but there is no democracy without elections. Once you delegitimize the election results, this can be the end of democracy. I mean, so what do you do if you don't believe the results? You do believe only the results in which you win. This is a problem. And I think that this is something that is, if it will have enough people that will believe it, support it, somebody will decide to raid the Knesset like they did the Capitol, that would be very problematic. Because in the United States, okay, let's imagine they took over the Capitol. So what? You have 50 states, you have the court, you have everything. But in Israel, it's so centralized. Once you take over the Knesset, what is really left? I mean, municipalities, maybe Tel Aviv will be, but this is really frightening scenario, and I hope we would never get there.
So maybe the way to deal with it is to perhaps enact some sort of government reform that will decentralize and perhaps, to an extent undercut this great centrality of the Knesset?
Clearly, I mean, whenever I'm talking about reforms, because when I work at the Israel Democracy Institute, it's all about decentralization. We must decentralize political power in Israel, not only horizontally to the court, to the Knesset, especially to the Knesset. The Knesset is very weak. But also, I think that to local government, maybe we should even have regional government.
So all the power is within the executive?
Yeah, I mean, it's not all the power, but it's too much power. Yeah, for sure. I mean, what is really interesting in Israel is that the checks and balances in Israel are there because we have a multi-party system. The parties are the suppliers of the checks and balances.
I want to. This actually brings me back to something that I wanted to ask earlier when you were talking about political stability. There is this notion you said about parties, and the political landscape in Israel is very fragmented. It has to do with the proportional system and also the relatively low threshold that has been raised over the years, but still remains rather low. It seems now, going back to this issue of Netanyahu, whether you're for him or against him, being the main issue of cleavage, is that it seems like almost there's not a two-party system, but a two-block system in Israel. That is, perhaps Netanyahu is the one-stop shop when it comes to politics, and ironically, it might even, in the long run, contribute to stability. The fact that there's just one area of contention.
Well, I think that having a two-block system with multi-party system, that's the Scandinavian dream. That's how politics work in Scandinavia. So, we are like Denmark, Sweden right now, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, you're smiling as you say, just for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean...
Well, things in Sweden don't look so great right now, I guess. So.
Yeah, but I mean, still, these democracies that get very high grades for being democratic, etc. The problem is, of course, that if we would have two blocks, center-right and center-left, that were ideological and not about different notions of democracy, then I would say that's great. That's maybe stabilizing the system. That's what we had actually in the 80s, 90s. We had the Ma'arach bloc, the Labor bloc, and we had the Likud bloc. We weren't happy then also, but still, we had two large blocks. This is a dream now, maybe. So I think that these two blocks are quite good. I mean, this is a way to aggregate the different parties. Just change the issue of bringing these blocks into an ideological issue, into a policy issue, something like this, and this would be much better, for sure.
Is there any political reform? I mean, I think Israelis probably have lost their any appetite for reforms after the direct election for the prime minister. That kind of backfired, and then raising the electoral threshold may backfire depending on your perspective. Is there any reform that you think, if you could recommend a reform that would shift Israeli politics or the party system into a more stable direction that would allow for governments to last a bit longer and not just be constantly preparing for the next election?
Well, there are different reforms that can be adopted. For example, one thing is not to allow the Knesset to oust itself with a regular majority. Now, of course, if I would say it 5 years ago, I would laugh at myself. I mean, who is going to oust himself once he was elected? But they did it 4 times already. So let's say we tell the Knesset, okay, there were elections. Now you have to build a government. If you want to oust yourself, you need a majority, let's say, of 70, 80 members of Knesset. Now, like a miracle, I would suggest they would find a way to establish a government. Probably a very, very strange government with 2 prime ministers, I don't know, but we would at least have a government. So you can change these rules, and this is not really such a big deal. Now, for many years, I have this idea, and we have this idea at the Israel Democracy Institute about changing the electoral system into a district system, not single-member districts, but multi-member districts like they use in Europe. And I believe this would change the political landscape. But not only this. Remember, we talked about decentralization. Once we will have districts, politics will be somewhat decentralized. There will be, for example, there will be representatives of the Negev, of the southern part of Israel, or the Galilee, the northern part of Israel. Arabs, Jews, right-wing, left-wing, they will have the same interest. We want a hospital. We want a good hospital for our people, Arabs, Jews, etc. So, I mean, just imagine what you can do in our country, and this is not a small country anymore, maybe in terms of territory, but in terms of population, we're 10 million. We're the same size as Sweden already. So I think we should go to this direction. We can...
Has it ever been done anywhere in the world? Switching from proportional to district election system?
It's staying with proportional, actually. The elections will be still proportional, but on the level of multi-member districts. So you're right, it would be less proportional maybe, but still... This is the system that is used all over Europe. Israel is actually unique in using the whole country as one national district. This is something that was adopted in 1949 for different reasons, war, and then, something that was temporary has become our reality for 70-something years. This should be changed, and I think it would bring a lot of...
I want to ask another thing about reforms. One reform that was passed a few years ago and was very well received at the time was the so-called constructive vote of no confidence, that a government could not be voted out in a vote of no confidence unless an alternative government is presented in the same Knesset. Has it worked?
Well, I should say that I really supported it. I'm still supporting it, but I must admit that I have this feeling that if we wouldn't have the constructive vote of no confidence, we would have a government. Because why Lieberman didn't join in April 2019 to Netanyahu's government? Because he knew that once he will support the government, he wouldn't be able to oust it because he wouldn't go with the left. Okay, so this the constructive vote of no confidence actually made politicians it makes them understand that once they're in, it's very hard to get out. Even though the last two governments there was a way out. One was not supporting the budget, and the other was just collapsing. But I think that with this reform, that I think that it should stay, because the whole idea of constructive vote of no confidence is that if you want to oust the government, show me that you have an alternative. You cannot be only against, be for something. I think that's a good idea. That I believe also in life. If you are criticizing something, you have to offer an alternative. Otherwise, please shut up. Okay? So if we look at
it's a lesson in civility more than anything.
No, I think really
humility.
That's how it should work. But then I return to it. So we have to balance it with a Knesset that cannot oust itself. A Knesset that, I tell the Knesset, dear Knesset members, 120 members Knesset, you were elected, now establish a government. You don't go anywhere until you establish a government. You have to give them incentives, strong incentives to establish a government out of what the Israeli people want, even if the Israeli people are divided. And this would balance the constructive vote of no confidence.
Would it also encourage not just the formation of a government, but also the ability to actually govern? Because it seems, that even once governments are formed, they are really constantly gearing up for the next election and maneuvering themselves against their rivals, including within the coalition, rather than focusing on actually governing. I mean, is it a problem of stability or governance, the ability to actually legislate?
Well, I think that if you look at the government from 2015 to 2019, Netanyahu's government, it was a stable government. There were some noises, but they had only 61 stable seats, and Lieberman coming in and out, as they always do. So, but still, there was a government for 4 years. So the last 4 or 5 elections now are extraordinary. But the problem is that once again, we crossed the Rubicon. There is always this option, and we heard Netanyahu and we heard his wife also saying that, we will also have 6 elections if we need. This is something that is, I don't know. Once you had the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, you can have so many, and this is really a problem. We crossed the Rubicon, and we should stop with it. We should stop with it by, I think, legislating these laws that will pressure the Knesset, tell the Knesset, you were elected, now you have to find a government. That's your problem, and we want to see a government. You cannot oust yourself. You cannot be always just negative. And this is really, even though we have constructive vote of no confidence, they still find a way to have new elections.
No, the problem is that the Knesset members themselves would have to act rationally, and we already talked about the prospect of that. So where are we heading? You said earlier that there's very minor differences between one election and the other, and you review it in your book. I actually, when I read it, I thought there were more major than you seem to present them now, about, for example, the differences in turnout between one election and another, and the difference in the number of votes for parties that didn't pass the threshold that was reduced, I think, between 2019 and 2020 by something like 90%.
Yeah, people go for elections one after the other. They learn how to vote. Yeah. Politicians also learn, and they do.
Practice makes perfect. So do we see any trends that might take us out of this mess, or is it really, are we heading for, just a repeat of the last 4 elections?
Electoral Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at general trends, you cannot be optimistic because Netanyahu has become somewhat weaker while the right wing has become somewhat stronger. I mean, the difference between right wing vote and Netanyahu vote only grew over the elections. And this tells you probably that if this trend continues, and trends do not have to continue, but if it does, so we will end up in the same place. We will have Netanyahu still with a plurality, not a majority, but, he's still the strongest guy in town, but he doesn't have a majority. So So
we will be seeing each other in a few months' time ahead of a sixth election.
Unless Netanyahu will get a 61, or unless there will be something like, some kind of a new government with 2 heads or whatever, and then we will meet in a year or 2.
Exactly, like we did, like the last government.
Perhaps by the 10th election, there'll be more of an appetite for the kind of political reforms that you were suggesting. Maybe by then there'll be a recognition that something does need to change.
All right, Professor Gideon Rahat of the Hebrew University, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you, Dov, for first in a series of collaboration between the Tel Aviv Review and UCLA's Israel in Depth. And also, I'd like to thank Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and also to ask you to write us a review. And I'm sure it applies to you as well, Dov, to Israel in Depth. Go to the Apple Podcast app and give us the highest rating you can. And support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Subscribe to our Patreon campaign, check out our archive, like us on Facebook, follow all of us on Twitter, and of course join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And from us here in Tel Aviv and there in LA, goodbye.